So I graduated last year itself, actually, and after that I worked with a tier one law firm for a few months. That did not gel with me a lot, and I had taken the decision to branch out and try to do some work on my own independently. And today I'm with LawSeco. I'm a senior associate and consultant with LawSeco, and I manage all the banking related courses. Will anyone else mind introducing themselves?
If you allow, may I?
Yeah.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nitin Bajaj. It's been around 1 year. I'm practicing in Negotiable Instrument Act and doing more of civil laws. Currently, I'm associated with a High Court lawyer. He's situated in Vikas Puri, MS O'Brien Associates.
Okay,
So,
that's
our,
great.
our majorly work, basically, our major practice is in Negotiable Instrument Act only, and we are mostly for the defaulters.
Okay, I get it. I understand. So, what are your aims for this webinar? What do you hope to gain from this today?
So basically, I have done, like I said, more of civil laws and NI Act. So I don't have any exposure to IBC Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code and SOFACI Act. So basically, I just want to know the procedure, like how we send the notice, what all are the limitation period. Like there is in Negotiable Instrument Act, there are so much of limitation, like 30 days
Yeah,
within the check bounce. We have to send a notice giving 15 days time to the other party to pay the payment, to make the payment, and then thereafter, if the payment is not made if the payment is not made within a period of 15 days, then after the expiry of 1 month, we can file a suit, criminal
yeah,
complaint
correct.
against him. So I just want to know the procedure of IBC as well as SOFACI Act.
Okay, okay. We will be mentioning those in a short manner because obviously it is not possible
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
to,
Yes,
because
sir. I
both of
can
them
understand,
are
sir. Not a problem, sir.
huge acts.
Not a
So,
problem, sir.
uh, anyone else wants to introduce themselves? See, guys, you should take this opportunity. We have 10, 13 people over here. Maybe we'll have more, maybe we won't. But you should take this opportunity to network, talk to each other, because that is one of the primary focus areas we're going to be talking about today as well. That is how you will start earning when you're branching out into a new area.
Yeah, hi, I'm Anita Bhatia.
Hi, Anita. How are you?
Fine. I'm retired from a bank and I worked in Bifer Cell for a long time. So,
Okay.
it's a familiar area for me. I have not done law. I was planning to do law, but
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously I wanted an income stream. So, I wanted to know if I can also do some part-time work like this because I was associated very closely with all this when I was in the bank.
Okay.
That's why.
Definitely. This you've come to the right place, I would say. This is like exactly the use case we would be targeting with this webinar today. I hope you gain some value out of it. Hi,
Hello,
Kaustubh. Hi, Kaustubh. We can hear you.
hello. This is Kaustubh Sarda. I am a fourth year law student studying
Mm-hmm.
in Aurangabad. So basically, this time is precious for learning this webinar. So I'm utilizing
Yeah.
this time. Thank you.
Definitely, it's absolutely correct. Anyone should be utilizing this time effectively. We have an uncertain period going on. We don't know what's going to happen, whether things are going to resume normally or not.
Yes.
So this is
Thank you.
definitely a time we can make productive use of. You already know why we are gathered here today. So our topic for today is how to earn 30,000 a month INR just by mastering notices under IBC, the Negotiable Instruments Act, and the SARFACI Act. Now, first of all, I would like to talk about who this is for. So, if you're fresh out of law school, or you're in law school currently and still have not decided upon the area of law you want to specialize in or practice in, or you are a fresher, even if you're not a fresher but have still not committed to a particular niche in law. So this webinar is for you, even for experienced professionals who have grown weary of their existing practice, because that happens sometimes. You can practice a particular area in law for a long period of time and then still grow tired of it. You might want something new in your life. You might want to branch out and diversify, connect to new people, generate a new income stream, as Anita rightly pointed out. So you have to experiment. And for that kind of experimentation, the webinar is for you. So first of all, let me just clarify that the 30K figure that we have included in the topic is merely indicative. And when I say that it is merely indicative, it is not I do not mean that in a negative way. I actually mean that it is very easy to achieve, and it is, if I would say, a lower target, if I would say so for myself, even for the people around me. Considering the particular area of law we are discussing, which is banking and finance, essentially recovery litigation, if we have to be even more specific. So 30K is not a very difficult figure to achieve. It is extremely realistic and it is easily achievable. Money is the lifeblood of business and economy. Obviously, these are cliches that do not need to be repeated at this point. And any business entity, whether engaged in the lending business or in the or requirement of borrowing, they would not like to part with their hard-earned reward, with whatever money that is due to them, with what they have earned. As a result, they are generally ready to shell out a good amount of money to spend on good lawyers and good professionals who will help them get their money back. So the only thing for us left to do as lawyers is just be strategic about it. So does this sound like you? Does this sound like you? Are you one of these people? So in that case, the webinar is for you. So there are a number of people who have little or no idea about the kind of work they are going to take up. Okay. So even if you have an interest in a particular field of law, you would not be sure, or you would not be perhaps ready to commit yourself to that particular area. Now, this is true of people in currently studying in law schools as well as people who are already working in the field. So even the number of practitioners who are already dissatisfied with their work is steadily rising. More and more people want to try something new, something exciting. They want to venture out and have a hand at something that they have not felt or experienced before. And everyone, that this is again applicable to everyone. Everyone wants to break off from the usual cycle of their life. They want something new to have. A number of these people look towards banking and finance law as one of the more enticing fields where you can set up a practice and you can start working. However, a large portion of the people who initially look upon banking and finance as something they could take up in the future, as something that could turn into a sustainable income stream for them, they initially do look at banking and finance for this, but they might actually end up shunning it in the end. Now, why is that? So, what I have seen is that people love money, but they hate numbers. So, the apprehensiveness that people have embedded in their minds with respect to mathematics, with respect to numbers, it is huge. It is huge, and at the very outset itself, a person looking to set up a practice in recovery litigation, that person might assume that these laws might be too technical, or they might be too arduous to understand, or they require some knowledge of accountancy per se. And these are some factors that push people away from banking and finance laws. They tend to bog down their intentions, even if they were initially inclined towards committing to this field. So, for example, if you read an RBI circular, now this is something that even I have felt before. So, when you're looking at an RBI circular, usually you find a number of new terminologies in the circular, and then you find those terminologies are not defined anywhere except in the circular itself, and they are not congruent with the how those terminologies are used by others in the field. So that is an area which troubles people. So, however, that is not a big deal. That is not something that should shoot down your intention of starting a practice in this area, and it is something that can easily be covered. Alternatively, a person might not know about the banking and finance world at all. Yeah. So, and the kind of opportunities it represents. So, if you think about it, banking and finance is actually the oldest business in the world. granted that earlier people did not use money or currency for this business, they used goods, there was the barter system, but the concepts of credit and finance are there since the beginning of time. So it may be said that it is the oldest industry in the world, one of the oldest industries, definitely. So even if you're a law student or if you're an experienced professional, wanting to diversify is not something otherworldly. Okay, you might want to do it, and through this webinar, I will help you. I will try to help you to achieve this. If any of this feels like you, trust me, none of these issues are major problems. They're major problems at all. They should not and cannot stand in the way of what you want to achieve. So in this webinar, we're going to talk about how we're going to take care of these problems and a little beyond that as well. You know what, since all of you are here, we have 55 people here today. That's great. So I'll make your life a little easier and I'll share a template of a perfect legal notice, a legal notice under section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act with you. If you stick till the end of this webinar, I'll share it with you on the chat. So in the end, even if you feel that I have not been able to deliver on the promises that I have made, you will definitely be walking away with something of value, something of saleable value, actually, something that you can actually capitalize on and earn. So what we will be discussing today is something that will help you move past the unease and the trepidation you feel before entering into any new area, whether it is law or in any other particular field. There is always a degree of unease that you feel. So shifting out from a comfort zone, whether it is a college for a law student or whether it is the comfort of an existing and established practice for a professional who's already working, shifting out of this comfort zone is not easy at all. So getting started with a completely new body of knowledge and new field of knowledge and getting to know everything about it, that is not easy either. However, at the end of the discussion, it will be. If you follow what we discuss today, you will not face any problem. I would like to again reiterate that these are not things that you need a genius level intellect for, or you need a godfather to guide you through. These are things you do not need to put in an extraordinary effort for. You do need to work hard, but you don't need to work extraordinarily hard as might be required in some industries. These are steps that ordinary law persons, now notice that I say law persons and not lay persons. So ordinary law persons like you and like I myself can complete and can take easily. And actually, now that I think of it, I actually have taken some of these steps. And I would urge you to do the same as well, because I feel these steps have materialized into something good, something saleable and marketable for me. And I hope that even you would be able to do that. So I introduced myself, but at the time, very few people had joined in. So I'll introduce myself again. My name is Aniket. I am a senior associate and consultant working with LawSikho. I graduated last year, after which I worked at a tier 1 law firm for a couple of months, and pursuant to which I tried to branch out as an independent practitioner. And all of this happened in the short span of a year after graduation. So I think I can talk about our topic today, having an ear at the ground itself. But I would yes like to point out, when I talk about certain things, a lot of the things are come from my own personal experiences, and a lot of the things are also that are knowledge that has been derived from people around me. So LawSikho actually has a brilliant group of lawyers working with them, and they are all connected with each other. We have our discussions, we have our doubt clearings. So there are a lot of brilliant people around me. Their brilliance also rubs off on you. So what is the old way? So I would just like to say that if you have any question, just put it in the chat or raise your hand. There's an option where you can raise your hand. You raise your hand and I'll unmute you and you can ask your question. So what is the traditional way to go about entering a new field, to enter a fresh field? And this is a question that is not tough at all. Absolutely. The traditional way You have two traditional ways to enter into a new field, and the first is to join, obviously, to join a senior lawyer as a junior, and you work with them to learn. The second way is to join either a law firm or a company. You join a law firm as an associate, or you join a company as an in-house counsel, and you start working, you start filling your term sheets, you start hitting your targets right away, and that is how you do. Now, what I feel is that both these conventional institutions are problematic in some manner. In one, you get the opportunity to learn, but not the opportunity to earn. You make very less, you earn a lot, you get a lot of exposure, you get a lot of insight directly working on the ground, but you do not get a lot of money, you do not get a lot of remuneration. It might not be fulfilling for some people. It might be quite problematic after leaving college, especially since even college fees are pretty high at this point of time. And in the other situation, you earn handsomely, you earn a brilliant amount of money, but you are expected to have some kind of an omniscient knowledge about everything. Your partner or your senior associate, he expects you to know most of the stuff that about the team you have joined. He or she will not usually have the time to take you through the step-by-step process or actually invest an amount of time that will help you move forward. So you are expected to deal with things yourself, and there is very, very little scope for error. So these are the traditional two ways that are there, and I would like to advocate that you move apart from this way. I'm not saying that you don't require guidance. You do require some guidance. So, but you might move apart from this traditional way. There are tons and tons of media and tools out there that shake the very foundations of this conventional system, that strike at the very root of these conventional systems. Now, especially in the wake of the COVID situation, with the reworking of the entire world order, which is currently going on, I would actually dare to opine that you do not need to slave away as a junior lawyer or as a junior associate at a firm in order to gain practical insight into the world of law. You and I both know that law schools only teach you how to read law. They can only teach you the jurisprudential aspects of law, and they are little or no good at all at teaching you what actually needs to be done when you're working in the field. Now, in COVID, what will happen is that the measures that are introduced as emergencies and remedials will slowly fall off, and they will become norms. And with the exponential push towards digitization, there are various learning and communication technologies that have acquired Spotlight, this very platform, for instance. And these can be utilized effectively and efficiently to upskill yourself in prolonged and this uncertain period of time. As I was talking with Kaustubh also, this is a very, very uncertain period of time, and we do not know how long it can go. So it should be used to gain greater skills into any body of knowledge that you feel. Again, I would like to mention this, that this does not mean that you do not need guidance at all. Obviously, you can branch out independently, but one needs to have someone that is there to point out your wrongs. That is the only thing you need a little bit of guidance for. So how can we go about this? How can we go about this? The very first thing I would like to say how we can go about this is that you get unstuck. Get unstuck. We are stuck in a lot of places in our life, whether it is the cycle of a routine, whether it is the pressures of an old job, whether it is our own internal apprehension. So you have to get unstuck from that position. So you might recall Newton's first law of motion. Does anyone know what the first law of motion says? Raise your hands or put it in the chat. Come on. Yes, Kaustubh.
Hello.
Yeah.
Is it correct? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
No, Kaustubh. That's the third law of motion. So,
Sorry.
okay, Shweta in the chat is absolutely correct. So the first law of motion is the law of inertia, which the law of inertia basically means that a body will stay at rest until some external effort is applied to move it from that position of rest. So that Newtonian philosophy is similarly applicable in our case as well. So we might have some mental blocks and we might be ingrained in our comfort zone that we have to step out of. We have to take some steps towards learning new things and towards venturing out into a new field of adventure. It definitely takes energy to move things into action. Intention is not enough. You need some energy to move things into action. If you don't change, if you don't make this change, I would like to put this very bluntly, you would be absolutely wasting your time. You will be stuck in the old and obsolete cycle that you are used to. You will have no variation. You will have no fun. You will have no progress. You will have no new knowledge. If you don't learn, you won't grow. You won't earn. So how can we actually get in stuff? I know it is all rosy. A lot of people are also talking about, okay, shift to talking about corporate law. Okay, I'll do that. So how do you get unstuck in respect of the IBC, the NI Act and the Sarfazi Act? So what I suggest is that, and this is something even I did as well, you write blogs and you write articles about a concept in law. Now, even if that is a new concept in law, you should definitely go ahead with that because it will help you get a certain clarity. It will help you get a handle over how to research in that particular law. It will help you get clarity over some concepts and it will definitely push you over the initial apprehension that you are facing in life. So for example, now these topics, they don't, you might say, okay, I am not skilled in this law. So how can I write an article on it? How do I go about researching for it? So you pick up topics that are not that tough. You pick up topics that the general public can relate to. The people who are aggrieved under these acts, who are seeking remedies under this act can be related to. So if we talk about IBC, you can, for example, take up a topic related to the role of guarantors, especially since the role of guarantors is again under a change and again under a spotlight because of the amendments made under the IBC. That is one topic you can write on. If you talk about Sarfazi, Sarfazi mein you can talk about how the jurisdiction clause in Sarfazi affects the working of NBFCs, how NBFCs are inclined towards using Sarfazi or not inclined towards Sarfazi. And when we talk about NI Act, though there has already been a lot of jurisprudence on the NI Act, you definitely can talk something about, you might have heard about the recent proposal related by the Ministry of Finance, and they are discussing about whether or not to decriminalize Section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act. So that is another thing you can talk about, and this will help you brush up in not only your research skills and your drafting skills, but when you share this with people, you don't need to get it, you, let me just again tell you, don't need to get it published in some high-fi law journal that is peer reviewed. Okay, so that part of time has gone. When I talked about communication and media technologies, that is what I meant. There are a number of really good blogs out there who are publishing work that is done by students and professionals alike. So that part is gone. Okay, if you have to make a dent in the industry or in the academics side of it, then you have to publish it in a super acclaimed law journal. That helps definitely. I'm not saying it won't help, it will definitely help. But these, for the initial first steps you're taking, you can even look at blogs that are easily available to people. So, and this is actually what even I did, and I continue to do this even when I have some free time. So basically the point is, any knowledge should not go to waste. Whenever you read anything at all, you make sure that you make use of it somehow. Either you make use of it in practice or you write something about it and you publish it to the world. You make them aware of the things you know about. So when they encounter a similar problem, they will contact you for this thing. They will remember, okay, this person wrote an article, he dealt with it very comprehensively, he answered all the questions. They will visit you. You know, if I talk about myself, just a couple of months back, or last month itself, actually, I published an article with Noals Kochi. It was on the topic of whether promoters can reclaim insolvent concerns in the context of Section 29A, whether promoters can reclaim control of debtors undergoing insolvency. Now, after I have actually gotten queries after I published that article. People saw that I was versed with those particular provisions of law, and they felt it fit to contact me to get guidance, to get an opinion on similar issues that they were facing. So this will definitely work. This is not some hokum derived from the world. This is a tangible step that you can take. Next, what you do is you go out. Now, I don't mean physically. If you are under quarantine or under a lockdown, you don't go out and violate that. That will be quite problematic. So this is meant to be figurative. You go out and connect, you go out and engage, you go out and work, you go out and learn, you go out of your bubble. Staying in your bubble actually costs you happiness, and it stops you from your growth, it stops you from learning new things, and internally it conditions your mind to actually settle for the inferior things in life. So you talk to your friends, you talk to your classmates, you talk to your family, you talk to your batchmates from law school, you talk to their friends and family. Yeah, so you talk to your friends, your classmates, you get to know what they are doing. Now, this is extremely important for this, because when we talk about the NI Acts, RFACE and IBC, these are money related litigations. These entail recovery of some sort. Now, not strictly recovery, but yeah, if you talk about it generally, it is recovery litigation. And now when it involves money, people need to have faith in you to entrust this kind of work. Okay? And they are usually in a pinch. People work hard, people want their hard-earned money back, they are in a pinch, so, but they would only give this sort of work to someone who they have faith in, who they have trust, either personally or in their abilities. So why you have to go out is so you can start building this faith and you can start building this trust. You get to know what everyone is doing, and you tell them what you are going to do. Now, when you tell people what you are going to do, you put it out there, so you cannot backtrack on your words, right? So that will again help you with the first shift that we are talking about, which is getting unstuck. So when you talk to people, you're not only building a network, you're also helping yourself get over the initial apprehension and problems that you face. This will motivate you not to turn your back on your decision, not to get scared, if I might so say so, and you will definitely be moving forward, and obviously it will help you building a network later on. So when I left the law firm I was working at, I also undertook this step itself. I went out, I met all the lawyers I had interned under during law school, every single one of them. And I was also very, very apprehensive. I had not met them in years. I haven't talked to them in years. I was very unsure about getting to know them, but they were quite welcoming. And you will find that the legal fraternity is quite welcoming. I have found them to be quite welcoming. And so you just reconnect, you build your network, you stay in touch, you wish them on their birthdays, you wish them on festivals. That these small things are a few things that go a long, long way. So, and when I came back from law school, I left the firm, reconnected with my gang, so to say, my gang. So I actually found my first client over there. So a friend of mine, just to give you an example, a friend of mine was involved in a particular construction project, and in that construction project, a supplier, large MNC supplier, actually had supplied a lot of faulty equipment, and they were not ready to reimburse the amount for the same. And in addition to the faulty equipment that had been provided, there were certain bounce checks that he had received from other suppliers, matter that had to be reimbursed, money that had to be reimbursed. So I decided to help him out. He approached me. Now, when we talk about faith, this is where faith comes in. Since that friend knew me personally, he knew the kind of work ethic I advocated, he could entrust me with a work of that stature, a work involving that amount of value, because he had faith in me. Now, if you do not have someone like this in your personal network. If you don't know someone like this directly, you have to build this faith. You have to show them value. Any and building faith and giving value is the third shift that we are going to talk about. Any and all transactions run on faith. What is money? Money is just a currency of faith. The amount of money a person is willing to give you is a measure of how much value he feels you can give to them. It definitely becomes a bit easier if you know someone directly who is engaged, who requires such services, but you still need to prove that you can be entrusted with this task and with their money. So even if you don't know someone directly, there are definitely ways to approach people. Now, approaching people for us lawyers, it is a little bit tricky, since obviously you must be aware that you are not allowed to solicit clients. The Bar Council of India specifically prohibits advertisements of a lawyer's services and prohibits the solicitation of work and clients. So that is one thing that you have to be careful about while approaching people. Uh, I will be, there are a few things what we can do without incurring the penalty for solicitation. Things you can do is, for example, we can locate startups. Okay, we can locate financial startups. If we're specifically talking about work related to IBC, NI, and Surface, you locate a financial startup near in your city, near where you live, and you offer pro bono work. There is the penalty on solicitation is not applicable on offering pro bono work. Now, when you offer pro bono work, you have a brilliant opportunity to prove to that particular company that this is something I'm great at. You can locate goods and services providers in various markets in your city, and you can offer them free legal trainings. Many times suppliers of certain goods and services have absolutely no idea about the legal remedies they have, about the legal rights they have under the various acts. And what you can do is you go up to them and you offer them certain legal trainings. You offer them free legal trainings. You show them how they are to take care of their documentation and keep their documentation up to date, how to maintain it, how to be aware of the various compliances they have to take care of under various acts, and what are the consequences of non-compliance as well. And you take them through the legal remedies that they might have in case they are aggrieved. So once you do this, you definitely will have the word of mouth going. And the word of mouth is something that plays a big role in NI Act cases, because everyone receives bounce checks. Everyone receives bounce checks. So you have to do a couple of cases in the NI Act, and I'm definitely sure in whichever district or high court you're practicing, you're gonna have a good time. You're gonna make a good name quite easily. And most often, from my personal experience, I would find that a lot of NI Act cases are usually settled right after you send the legal notice, since it attracts a criminal penalty. People do not usually want to let it go to court. The ground is made out very easily, and the recovery rate, although there is a backlog of cases that have already been instituted, I'm talking about cases that do not have to be instituted even, because the the payee comes up and is ready to settle the case with you. So when you approach people and they have, you give them a legal training on the various compliances and remedies they have, you offer pro bono work. So after you have done pro bono work, most often than not, after you have impressed the person, he will most likely offer you work. Now, considering our current situation, let's talk about our current situation where the Section 138 of the NI Act is proposed to be criminalized. Now, proposed to be decriminalized, sorry. And once it is decriminalized, the section is going to lose its teeth. It is not going to scare people anymore, and you might have a problem in taking a remedy under this section. So I would say that right now is the best time to reach out to people. Right now is the best time where you file your notices under section 138 and you get the ball rolling in respect of the legal proceedings. So even in the future, when the proposal is finalized and the section is not criminal in nature anymore, still you can have the defense of having instituted the complaint via notice much before the decriminalization happened and still get a good amount recovered. Pricing techniques obviously factor in over here. Now, when we talk about pricing techniques, you basically have to pace yourself. You not only have to pace yourself, you also have to strike a balance. Now, where is the balance that you have to strike? So, one factor that plays an important role is that if you start with a really low figure from the beginning, you will find it hard to upscale in the future. So if you have a very, very reasonable amount in the beginning, you will find it hard to increase your fees in the future, especially considering subject, of course, to the experience you have. That obviously depends. So if a lawyer already has a network in place, he would have an easier job branching out to these new fields as opposed to a fresher who will have a bit of a tougher job having to set up the entire network as well. So what you do is you have a client, okay? You, in this particular time, what you do is you, after you've done pro bono work from them, you say, I'll just take 5K for drafting of this notice. I'll just take 5K and I will take a further, a small percentage of the money only if the recovery is completed. Now, this sort of a pricing technique is something that nobody will refuse, especially considering the nature of how lawyers are with money. So this is a very lucrative deal for clients, and it will assure him that even the lawyer will work in a much better manner, in a more efficient, in a more efficacious manner, because even he will get the rest of his fees only if the recovery is made completely. And now the same thing goes for SARFAESI also, because if you note, if you have gone through the proposal, even offences under the SARFAESI Act are sought to be decriminalized. So even the SARFAESI Act and the NI Act, they are both going to lose their teeth in the future if this is implemented. So these are the basically soft skilling techniques that you would need to do to branch out to these particular areas. Now, the most important thing that you have to do is skill development. You need to upskill yourself to be able to do that pro bono work I talked about, to offer that legal training. You need to have a knowledge of the entire law. So this is what the last and most important shift is. Now, this is last only considering the sequence of things that I have told you. It is not last in the sequence that you should be implementing them, because skill development is something that you have to undertake throughout this entire process. Skill development is something that does not come at a later stage, and it is something that you will do every day. You have to read. Reading is the most important factor in a lawyer's life. Okay, you just read. You read the law, you read the newspaper, you read what other practitioners have to say. And why is it important? It is important because you must have an opinion, and that opinion must come from your own mind. That opinion cannot come from a Google page or an article that somebody else has written. You also, and to express your opinion, you have to have a certain level of confidence in your ability. Now, where will that confidence come from? That confidence will come only if you have the skills that are necessary to perform that particular task. You have to have the position where you can talk to a senior lawyer, and if you're discussing interpretation of a particular section, you can say that, okay, this, कि sir ऐसा भी हो सकता है कि maybe what you're saying is correct, but sir, according to my interpretation, ऐसा भी हो सकता है. You have to have that kind of thing inside your kitty. So when you talk about notices, we'll talk a little bit about provisions. Now, a lot of people are getting apprehensive about that. It is important to have an idea not just about how legal notices work, because the conception is correct that legal notices are one of the simplest things that a practitioner drafts in his litigation, in his practice. They are one of the simplest things, but their importance cannot be discounted. They cannot be discounted at all, because in a lot of cases the sending of a legal notice is mandatory. It is mandatory and it acts as a trigger point for the entire process. So that, and because of that, it is important to understand how the legal notices you send fit into the overall scheme of the act. You need to draft your notice in such a manner that will, such that it stands the test that is posed by the provisions of the act itself. So if you feel that you can just read 4 or 5 provisions regarding sending of notices and you would be able to get this work and earn 30K a month as the title states, that is not possible. You will have to learn about the entire act, because there are a lot of requirements that other provisions place on the legal notice. There are a lot of mistakes, very tiny mistakes, if I say so from my personal experience, that I have observed that people make, which clearly evinces a lack of knowledge. Now, that is a lack of knowledge that you must have. So, when you talk about legal notices in general, what are the essentials that a general legal notice has? It has to be on a lawyer's letterhead. It needs to set out a brief statement of facts. It needs to specifically set out the relief you are seeking from the person you are sending the notice to. It needs to specify what kind of steps you are going to take in case the relief is not provided or not settled by the person who you're sending the notice to in the appropriate time limit. That time limit needs to be specified clearly. So these are the essentials of a general legal notice. But even this knowledge is not enough. All right, this knowledge is not enough, because you have to be aware of statute specific requirements. For example, when you go to SARFAESI Act, when you go to SARFAESI Act, what you find is that there are 3 kinds of notices you have to, and all of them are contained under section 13. So you might feel, yeah, Acha, I'll just go and read section 13 and it will enable me to file notices under the SARFAESI Act. That cannot be done. Okay. So you will have to get an idea of the overall framework of the act as well. The 3 notices that are under the SARFAESI Act are the demand notice under section 13(2), the possession notice thereafter under section 13(4), and the sale notice that is filed also under section 13(4). So when you are drafting these notices, there are very tiny things that sometimes are overseen by people, that is sometimes do not fulfill. So when you draft a demand notice, you have to give a time period of 60 days for the person to uh, pay you back the amount of money that is the subject of security. And after that, you are entitled to file a possession notice, in which you have to give a time period of about 30 days. And after which you file a sale notice for the security interest, and you file the sale notice. In that, you give a notice again of at least 30 days after the public notice for sale of the secured property. Now, what is important for SARFAESI is that the legal notice under SARFAESI can be assailed at any stage of the proceedings. It is not the situation where you have to raise an objection at the very first instance. If there is any infirmity in the notice, you can easily assail it at a later stage. Hence, you need to be extremely cautious and extremely vigilant while drafting a notice under the SARFAESI Act. It has to be done in meticulous detail. Otherwise, it can be fatal to your entire proceedings. It will blow down your proceedings like a gust of wind blows down a house of cards. Simple as that. So, for example, when you have to give a notice of 30 days, when you're giving a possession notice, you have to give a time period of 30 days. So, I know of cases where the banks have not counted the days properly. They have given only 29 days instead of 30 days. So there is difference of just 1 day. Because of a difference of 1 day, the courts have struck down the entire proceedings initiated under the SARFAESI Act. That has happened. So that is the level of attention that you need to pay to drafting notices under the SARFAESI Act. The usual mistakes that I have seen people make are with respect to misquoting the date. They put the wrong date, that shakes the entire structure. They put the wrong address, that affects the service of notice, a very easy ground to argue upon. They make a mistake in the calculation of the amount. That is also something, because if you notice section 13, what it says that you have to demand the entire amount in full, repayment of the entire amount in full. Now this includes the principal as well as the interest. It is not that this amount will include just the amount that has become due and payable, the amount that has been defaulted upon. You, under the SARFAESI Act, you will demand the entire principal amount. So considering this, we have a few essentials of notices under the SARFAESI Act, which I would summarize as the limitation period. Basically, the limitation period, the agreement which is the basis of default, the agreement which sets out the rights and obligations of the party in which the security interest has been created, the description of the property. If there is an improper description of the property, the metes and bounds are not described properly, even in that case, this problem can be fatal to your proceedings. And considering one very important thing is that the security interest must be registered with the central registry created under the SARFAESI Act. If the security interest is not registered, you will not be able to enforce your rights under the SARFAESI Act. This is something a lot of lenders miss out on. And another thing I would like to clarify here is that SARFAESI is only available for banks and NBFCs. And individual lenders cannot take the route through SARFAESI. So Shora is asking, till the time IBC stands suspended, what alternate options do I have? Now, see, Shora, the alternate options will depend upon the nature of the asset the security interest has been created in. So if the asset is of a good saleable value, if it has a good amount of liquidity in the market, then definitely SARFAESI would be a better option to go for, because these assets can directly be sold. If you're aware of the process under SARFAESI, what happens is that the lender acts as both the judge as well as the jury. The lender will send the notice, the borrower will reply to the notice, and it is within the lender's power to accept or reject the contention raised by the borrower. So in this case, the only thing which requires attention is whether the asset in which the security interest is created, whether that asset is saleable in the market. For if I talk about certain infrastructure asset, for example, there is a metallurgy company which has borrowed a loan for the construction of a new factory, and the loan has been granted because the basis, because the rights in the new factory that is going to be constructed has been charged to the bank itself. So an entire factory is very difficult to sell. It is not something that is liquid that can easily give you money. So in that case, it would not be advisable to go for SARFAESI. It would be advisable to take some separate measures. Now, we've dealt with notices under the... Okay, so Dipansh has a question. Can a creditor evict a tenant using rights under SARFAESI? So actually, this is something that is not the scope of this session today. Okay, since we're talking about SARFAESI only, I'll just give you a brief summary. What happens is that there has been a lot of disputes regarding this, actually, whether tenancy law overrides SARFAESI or whether SARFAESI overrides tenancy law. And I think the issue has been settled. I don't remember the name of the case, but I'll definitely share with you later, Dipansh. And what happens is that if a valid tenancy has been created before the issuance of the demand notice under section 13(2), in that case, the tenant cannot be evicted from the property, and the lender can definitely acquire symbolic possession of the property by issuing the possession notice, but he is not entitled to sell the property. So that is what happens with respect to tenancy. However, the tenancy must be registered properly according to, I think it is provision 65A of the Transfer of Property Act, 65 or 65A. I'm really sorry, I'm not sure about that. But in that case, this can be done. If the tenancy is created pursuant to issuance of a demand notice, then the tenancy does not sustain, then you can easily evict a tenant. So Ikshwaku asks, can IBC be invoked against a private person? No, Ikshwaku, IBC cannot be invoked against a private person. Since there are some questions that are beginning with IBC, let's talk about IBC notices now. So what is the notice that you file under IBC? The main notice that you file under IBC is under section 8 of IBC, which is basically notice that is sent by an operational creditor. Now, who is an operational creditor? An operational creditor is one who has lent out money, who has basically given goods or services on credit. I am a supplier of goods and services, and I have supplied certain, for example, raw materials to a company, and that company has not repaid me, uh, has not paid back the money for the raw material that I have provided to that company. So in that case, I will file a demand notice under section 8 of the IBC. Now, when you talk about section 8 demand notice, it is a form has been provided. Actually, a form has been provided under the adjudicating authority rules under form 3, form 4. So in the demand notice, you have to give a period of 10 days. You have to give a period of 10 days for the debtor to repay the money or to bring to your notice the existence of a dispute regarding the money. I'm really sorry. And only after the lapse of this period of 10 days can you file the application to initiate insolvency resolution process of the company, which is done in form 5. So what becomes critical in this respect? You have to be very attentive about whether a dispute exists or not. If a dispute exists, your application will not be admitted by the NCLT. Now, how the dispute is determined not merely on the basis of a proceeding that has been instituted in a court or tribunal of law, but even if there is a substantial dispute and there is certain evidence to support it, even if an actual proceeding has not been instituted, even that dispute will count as one under this act that can actually prove fatal to your proceedings under the IBC. So, a lot of people have a question about the status of arbitral awards with respect to IBC, and just I would like to quickly clarify here that arbitral awards are treated as a record of debt, and they are to be treated as an operational or at par with an operational creditor, and they are not treated as a dispute on the basis of which the proceedings can be thrown out. So what is essential for IBC notices? Again, since a limitation period, a clear limitation period of 10 days is involved, so you have to take care of that limitation. Even the initial limitation, you have to send a demand notice within 3 years. If I remember, within 3 years of the default having occurred. You have to take care of your contract for supply of goods and services. The contract must be attached to the notice. The invoices generated therein must be attached to the notice. Your bank statement needs to be attached to the notice to prove that you have not received the amount of money that you are raising in the invoice. Now, the contract that you have entered into for the supply of goods and services, even the various nitty-gritties under that it has to be registered, it has to be stamped, it has to contain an interest clause. So this is a recent decision that has happened that you cannot ask for interest if your purchase order or if the contract under which you are supplying goods and services, if those do not have an interest clause, you will not be able to demand interest at a later stage. So that is another thing that is fatal to the proceeding. Whether you are an MSME or not, if you are an MSME, you are required to disclose it to all the parties that you're dealing with, and only then can you avail the various exceptions that are provided to MSMEs under the act. Now, one of you had a question regarding IBC. I believe it was someone called Aditya. Yeah. how are assets to be treated if a company is under insolvency and assets have been attached by the enforcement directorate? Okay, so uh, Aditya, this is an extremely specific query. Again, this is not part of the scope of work that we are dealing with today. However, I will attempt to answer your question. There is a lot of tussle between the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and the Ministry of Finance with respect to prevalence of the IBC or the Prevention of the Money Laundering Act. There is a lot of dispute, a lot of tussle, a lot of uncertainty is there. One particular case is currently sub judice at the Supreme Court itself right now, in which a stay has been granted on the attachment effected by the ED, and the stay that has been granted is actually it is working now, but the Supreme Court is yet to give a final relief on the same and finally discuss and give a ratio on which is more prevalent. However, going by the decisions of the NCLAT itself, you might want to read the case of Bhushan Steel, in which has Bhushan Steel and Power, the CIRP of Bhushan Steel and Power. A lot of these issues were dealt with comprehensively therein. So from what I have learned is that both of these acts have non-obstant clauses. So, but IBC having come in later, having a later non-obstant clause that operated later, so that is something that would prevail. And other than that, the moratorium does apply to to ED proceedings. The moratorium does apply, and another factor that is there is that the NCLAT has categorically held that the amount claimed by the ED has to be treated as an operational debt under the IBC, and it will be fulfilled in accordance with the waterfall provision that is provided under section 52 of the IBC. Sushil says, can notice under section 8 be sent for default of monthly payment by a hotel chain to a hotel that was taken on management? Sushil, I'll just unmute you. Can you just clarify your question a little bit?
Yeah, Aniket, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah,
How are
okay.
you?
Yeah, fine, thanks. Nice session. Basically, the hotel owner is an individual,
Okay.
and I don't want to take the name of the hotel chain, but
No worries.
give it under management to the hotel chain. The branding and all that was under that hotel chain.
All right.
And since the last 4 or 5 months, they have stopped receiving the payments, monthly payments. So,
Okay.
considered.
So,
Can the individual hotel owner be considered operational creditor, and can he file a notice under Section 8?
so is there a specific contract for supply of goods and services that the hotel owner has entered into?
Yeah, there is a contract, not for, okay, I don't know if you can, services, you can call it.
It is a contract for services, so definitely he will be entitled to file a notice under Section 8. And the only thing he has to be careful about is the various jurisdictions, the pecuniary jurisdiction that is present inside the IBC. So you might be aware recently, because of the COVID situation, the government has raised the limit to a minimum default of rupees 1 crore. So if the default is upwards of rupees 1 crore, you would definitely, the hotel owner would definitely be entitled to file under Section 8 and Section 9 pursuant to that.
Okay, if the cumulative amount is over 1 crore, is that enough, or does the monthly amount have to be 1 crore?
The cumulative amount will also work if by now, but even another thing that you have to factor in is that right now, filing it now would not be favorable, because another amendment has come into IBC according to which claims that are filed after 25th March, they are not being considered by the NCLT as of now, because they are considered to be claims that have been created due to the disruptive effects of the coronavirus.
He not come under that moratorium because he defaulted even before this COVID thing. Even prior to that, he has defaulted.
Then you can definitely file it. But again, once again, then what happens is that the NCLT takes into account the urgency of the situation. Like even I am aware of certain people, and I know of certain practitioners who have clients like that who have filed the CIRP, who have filed a notice as well as the CIRP just a little bit before the March date of the suspension of the CIRP. But even those are currently held in a vacuum, and the NCLT is not taking them up because it is wanting to take up matters that are urgent. Now that urgency is subjective. So if an urgency is there, it can definitely be taken up. Otherwise, this is something that lies in a gray area because of the timing.
Any hint as to how we can prove it is urgent?
How to prove it as urgent is you need to show some kind of irreparable or irreversible damage that will be done, or some gross travesty of law and justice that will be done if it is not heard. So these are the kind of factors that you will need to show. But once again, the NCLT is being pretty strict about it, if I let you know.
Okay, and this Form 3 that you mentioned, notice under Section 8,
Yeah.
is it available online?
Yeah, it is available under the adjudicating authority rules, the application to adjudicating authority rules.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll check that out.
Okay, Sushi. You can, yeah, thank you.
So you were saying,
I was just saying that all of you can actually, if you want to clear any doubts or if you want to get further skills on this, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, because see, you need a good knowledge of banking and finance for this. You cannot just take knowledge of a few provisions and then start practicing in the field. You will need to have an overarching knowledge about the laws, about the documentation, in order to be completely effective in this.
30,000 won't come so easily.
Yeah. Okay, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn if you want. If you have any doubts, I can help you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sushi. So what we have left for now is that notice under the NI Act. The NI Act, under the NI Act, you send a notice under Section 138. Section 138 is basically something that criminalizes the bouncing of a check. If someone has issued a check to you towards the discharge of any liability or towards the discharge of any debt, and that check is bounced by reason of insufficient funds or by reason of the payment having been stopped from the end of the payee, of the payer himself. So in that case, a notice is filed. Now, in this case also, the notice acts as a trigger for the entire process. And what is important here is that you have to present the check within its validity period. A complaint under this section will be valid only if, one, the check is presented within its validity period, and two, if it has been returned on account of reasons that are covered under the section. So the reasons that are covered under the section are insufficiency of funds and stopping of payment. So if it is returned for some other reasons such as signature mismatch, so in that case, you will not be entitled to file a notice under Section 138. And again, the limitation period again acquires great importance over here, since you are, after the returning of the check, you are to file the notice within 30 days. So once 30 days period has been passed, you cannot file the notice. And in the notice, you have to give a period of exactly 15 days for repayment of the amount. And if the amount is failed to be repaid within 15 days, in that case, you can go ahead and file a complaint. Now, this is actually a great provision, since if you are held to be liable under Section 138, what happens is that you can actually be imprisoned for a term of nearly 2 years. So that imprisonment is something that pushes people to actually settle their amounts in a timely manner, and a lot of these cases actually don't even make it to the court. Now, this is a very important gateway assignment that you can take up. What are the essentials? Just a day delay of a single day can be fatal to your notice and complaint under this section. So again, what are the essentials under Section 138 notice? Now, this is a notice that I will be sharing with you shortly, a template and a draft of this notice. So what are the essentials? The name of the drawer should be there correctly. It must be sent through registered post, because the slip that you get that acknowledges delivery, that acquires a lot of importance in later proceedings. all of the accused have to be mentioned in the notice. So in the case of a company, this is important because you have to mention the accused who are responsible, whether they are directors who are in charge of that particular transaction, those people who exercise effective control of over that particular transaction, all their names have to be mentioned. Otherwise, the complaint will become useless. You will not be able to implement them at a later stage. You have to give details about the particulars of the check, the date, the amount, check number, etc., the details of the transaction under which the liability or debt arises, and also the date of return of the check, the date on which the check has been returned by the bank to you, and for what reason has it been returned. You have to mention that the check was presented on this particular date and within the validity period, and it was returned by the bank. And you have to specifically mention the 15 days period of time that you are providing to the opposite party to repay the amount. You also have to explicitly set out the obligation which would arise in case the party fails to discharge the amount within 15 days period, and the specific legal recourse you are going to take, which can either be the criminal complaint under section 138, or it can be filing of a summary money suit under CPC. So these are the essentials of a notice under NI Act. Now you must have realized that all this is something that you cannot get from one single source or one single point. There is not one particular material available on the web that will give you the kind of knowledge to enable you to practice completely and in a wholesome manner. For that, you require skill development. For that, you need to require requisite amount of skills. You need someone to guide you when you are going wrong, and you need someone to assist you in maintaining connections. So that is why, and now considering it is not extremely feasible, some of you might not even want to step out of your house because of the COVID situation. In even I am one of those persons. So you have, maybe you will have to pursue your skill development online. Maybe you need some counseling, maybe you need some mentoring. So that is something that today you can pursue online. So are there any questions, guys? I'm ready to take up some questions. You can raise your hands or put it on the chat now. Yeah, Nitin asks if the return memo says refer to Drawers Bank, then also we can send a legal notice. First, you have to refer to the Drawers Bank, and you basically the amount that the ground that has to be proved is that there is insufficient funds in the bank account of the person who has issued the check to you. The insufficiency of funds, or there has to be a malified act on his part. For example, if there are sufficient funds as on the date when he's issued the check, but once you furnish the check to your bank, and in the meantime the person transfers funds or withdraws these funds, so what happens in this case is that it is considered to be a malified intention, and you are entitled to proceed under section 138 of the NI Act. Okay, so are proceedings of NCLT only online now? Yeah, so I am aware about NCLT Delhi and NCLAT. So both of them have released e-filing procedures, and that e-filing is done. So most of that work has moved online. So, but the physical registry is still a problem these days. So guys, are there any more questions? I'm getting a lot of extremely specific queries now. Now, this is something I would not like to deal with right now. You can please connect with me on LinkedIn for these specific queries, because since we've also overstepped the limit. So are there any more questions? Okay, so I'll share the file that I promised you. Just a second. I'm going to share two things with you. One is the file, and another thing that I'll share with you that can actually help you. You can be the judge of that. Actually, you can view through the skills that we are offering, skills that LawSeco is offering in its banking and finance course. It is an extremely expansive course. So that is something you can look over and consider. No, Sumit, you cannot send a notice on the ground of a mismatch of signature on the check. This is the link that you will you can pursue for getting an idea about the notice under 138 Act. This is a complete notice under 138 Act. Yeah, Sumit, I've answered your questions. On the ground of a mismatch of signature, you cannot file a notice under the section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act. So thank you guys. I sincerely hope that you acquired some kind of knowledge, some kind of value over this. Now I am available on LinkedIn if you need to connect, and if you need to refresh your skills, if you need some counseling, we have some amazing counselors and mentors at Losico. We have a brilliant set of people over here who are teaching, who are discussing, who are guiding young minds. So I hope that you will connect with us, and I hope that we can help you out for your future endeavors. Bye guys.